Hi YouTube, Happy New Year if you're watching this in January. Hi if you are new here, or if you're a regular, hi. I always appreciate views and comments. Today I will be doing a review of the first film in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, entitled simply Spider-Man, and it is based on the Marvel comics of the same name. I remember seeing this at the cinema as a teenager, which ages me slightly, and I enjoyed it. I revisited this at Christmas, and I don't know why I hadn't watched it again sooner, as I really thought it was good fun, and I did actually remember various scenes. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy is deemed to be the most popular, probably attributed to Tobey Maguire, who's a very good fit for Peter Parker, and the villains such as Willem Dafoe, who gives a stellar performance as the Green Goblin. I think recent iterations are possibly directed at a younger viewer, perhaps. Upon asking Marvel and Spider-Man fans, of whom I know, certainly Raimi's interpretations are favoured, and the sequel to this one is everybody's favourite. It gets such high praise indeed. Sam Raimi was somewhat of a wild card as a director for such a gargantuan film, as he was an independent filmmaker known for, what I have to say, in my opinion, the awful Evil Dead films. I can't watch those. Amusingly, Bruce Campbell, who features in the Evil Dead films, he plays a role in each of Raimi's Spider-Man films. More of that later. Spider-Man, as I already mentioned, is played by Tobey Maguire, who has had a very varied career thus far. I certainly remember him from more serious films, for want of a better word. I think he is on point as the rather nerdy and likeable Peter Parker, who was meant to be of a diminutive stature and not stereotypically attractive. And what I mean by that is he's not unattractive, but you wouldn't cast him as Bond, for example, and you wouldn't cast James Norton as Spider-Man, for instance. And I think Andrew Garfield, who was a later Peter Parker, I guess more typically attractive. He was maybe for a different audience again, as he's more fitted for a leading man role. All of that said, Tobey Maguire's performance as Peter Parker is very good, and I shall start with the story. Peter is academic and a kind-hearted teenager who is passionate about his studies and Mary Jane, his long-time neighbour. Peter befriends Harry, who is the son of Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborne, a wealthy entrepreneur. Harry and Peter are visiting, along with other peers, a university laboratory which focuses on genetic engineering, when Peter gets bitten by a genetically modified spider. He gets home and he feels rather grim. Parallel to these events, Norman Osborne, who is fond of Peter, he even at one point says he's like a son to him, volunteers to be the object of an experiment which he feels is critical because basically his company aren't keen on him and he needs a particular product to be better than his competitors. It's against the advice of his scientists, but as a result becomes the Green Goblin and leads life as Osborne and his nefarious alter personality. I think this is a good point, actually, as these events are running parallel to each other, as the Green Goblin is Spider-Man's nemesis, yet as humans, if you like, they get along. They become super versions of themselves at the same time. Peter develops spider-esque traits and powers. He decides he needs a car to impress Mary Jane and decides to enroll in a wrestling match based on his newly acquired strength. Remember when I mentioned Bruce Campbell? He is the announcer for the match, and he actually names him Spider-Man, so he has a brief but important role. I recognised his voice and his memorable countenance. The wrestler in question is Randy Savage, who I hadn't heard of when I watched this as a teenager, but apparently he is famous. Oh yeah! When Peter graduates from high school, he uses his powers for good, and the public are curious about this masked hero. He uses this to his advantage with Mary Jane, who he manages to save multiple times. Norman, upon hearing the board of directors have given a recommendation of incompetence, he gets on his Green Goblin gear and attacks a parade. Spider-Man saving Mary Jane again. The Green Goblin drugs Spider-Man, rendering him temporarily unable to move, asking him to join forces for evil, essentially. Spider-Man, of course, refuses and is wounded after a fight with the villain. Norman sees that it is Peter who is his nemesis. After arriving at a Thanksgiving dinner with Harry and Peter and Mary Jane at Harry and Peter's apartment, and he notices his wound. So that's how he knows. Norman is aware that he can hurt Spider-Man if he attacks his beloved aunt, May, and his loved ones are his Achilles heel. Norman has wrestled with his other version of him. After speaking to him in the mirror, he hears his voice, and essentially he becomes the weaker version. The Green Goblin is pretty much Norman. Harry, who is Mary Jane's boyfriend, informs his father Norman that Mary Jane actually loves Spider-Man, and, well, you can imagine that is not good news for her. I won't reveal the ending of this film, as I never do in case you haven't seen it. I would recommend Spider-Man, as it's good fun and the cameos are great. I particularly like that it doesn't pretend to be anything other than a superhero film. It isn't dark, it isn't gritty. It isn't like the really recent iterations of Batman, for example. I think Willem Dafoe and Tobey Maguire are the best performances of all of them. Rosemary Harris is pretty good too, as Aunt May. And the Green Goblin mask is actually quite like Willem Dafoe's face. It is rather comical if you actually look at it. I think that this is the difference between Spider-Man and Batman. I asked actually a friend which he prefers, Batman or Spider-Man, and he says they are different, which my husband concurs with. And I didn't really understand this, but on rewatching this, I do now. Spider-Man is lighter-hearted, and also he has powers. Batman is a billionaire who uses his tools to become a superhero. I actually am referring to the Keaton Batman. That's my favourite Batman for reference. I'm not really that bothered about the other iterations of the Batman films. And to connect those films, actually, Danny Elfman composed the score for Burton's Batman and these Raimi Spider-Mans. I have reviewed those Batman films, actually. If you would like to watch those, I can link them below. Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy are the films which launched 1,000 memes, and you probably are. If you're a fan of Spider-Man, then you probably are familiar with the memes. And the famous quote, "with great power comes responsibility," I think a lot of people think that actually that is just a Spider-Man thing, but actually no, it is a famous quote. It's Roman. Okay, some facts here. The Twin Towers are reflected in the lenses of the Spider-Man costume, which the production team didn't notice, apparently. And that gives it a rather chilling quality, I think. Bill Paxton's dad. We love Bill Paxton here. The royal we. Now, I love Bill Paxton. I think he's great. I think a lot of people do. He plays Norman's butler. So Bill Paxton's dad has a cameo. I will be reviewing the next sequel, and I have a review of it's a really interesting film, actually, speaking of Bill Paxton. So he features in this film called The Last Supper. I did a short of this if you want to just look at the short, and that's in the pipeline. It's definitely one of my favourite films in the 90s. It's kind of under the radar, but it's a really intelligent film. It's really good. And I recently reviewed Megan, I've done Matrix, sort of variation, and I will do requests as well. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, and I think I better finish it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.